Welcome. In this episode, we are going to continue looking at early imperialism by looking at the case studies for Japan and for Africa. In Japan, we notice many similarities to Europe, most notably in the makeup of Japanese society. That the closest analogy to what we've already studied is Japanese feudalism, that they had the emperor in place of where Europeans called a king, daimyo, and what we had referred to as lords, and in place of knights, the samurai, the sort of elite, lordly, noble soldiers. And you had those oaths of loyalty, and then you had the mass of peasants who kind of didn't count. And it's remarkable how similar that the setup was. Take note here of one of the family, the Tokugawa, because they will play a bigger role in post contact. And so, again, pre contact, Japan was a relatively technologically backward country. It was not a trade, it was not a dominant country in trade. Japan is not rich in natural resources. And so, when Europeans landed in Japan, there were many aspects of European culture and trade that intrigued the Japanese, and their trade goods spread wildly. Their uh, many cultural ideas and technologies spread widely, and even Christianity, which remember many of the European imperializers had a missionary spirit and were trying to spread Christianity, and so that spread widely in Japan. All of this change happening very quickly disrupted life in Japan, and many people embraced it and many did not. The Tokugawa consolidated their power and, through war and diplomacy, solidified control over Japan. Now, they did not destroy or overthrow the emperor, but rather created a shogunate where the leader of the Tokugawa family would be the shogun. It would be similar to a chancellor or prime minister, someone who really runs the country, but does so not on their own authority, but in the name of the king, or in this case, the shogun would run in the name of the emperor. And one of their chief policies was to close the door and seal out European incursions and the changes that they brought with them and the dominance of trade that they brought with them. And again, as an example of how the Europeans did not have dramatic advantages compared to other parts of the world, again, Japan was one of the weaker, less technologically sophisticated countries in that region and the world. And all they had to do was stand united behind a single ruler, the emperor and his shogun, and they successfully expelled and prevented European influence for several hundred years. And our second case study today is we'll look at the many countries in Africa. Now, remember that North Africa has much in common with the Mediterranean. Remember that waterways are more like highways than barriers throughout most of human history. And so in the Mediterranean world, Greece and Rome and Southern Europe are intimately connected with North Africa. So there's no discovery period for North Africa. They were certainly in contact and had been for a long time. It's sub-Saharan Africa. See, the Sahara Desert acts like a barrier. North of the Sahara, the dominant ethnicity are Arab North Africans, culturally, linguistically, and sub-Sahara, they're ethnically Black Africans, and so really that almost separates a world because North Africa has a lot in common with Southern Europe. North Africa has a lot in common with the Middle East, but the Sahara acts as a massive barrier, cutting Africa into two sort of ethnic chunks. And so, contact with Southern Africa, Sub Saharan Africa, is what is new. And the dominant aspect that impacts world history, that explains how and why the world is today, is the slave trade. This took place through what was called, and we'll talk about this later in our Americas chunk, is the triangular trade, this pattern of trade. So we'll see this again of that different regions of the world had different demands. Due to the depopulation of Native Americans in the Americas, you had a large amount of land that was sparsely populated. Europeans could not persuade enough Europeans to come fast enough, and when they did, no one wanted to be a peasant for another man. Everyone wanted to be their own farmer. And so one of the only ways to grow in wealth was to hire low-paid people to work beneath you. And since they were not forthcoming, they quickly resorted to indentured servitude of whites and forced labor of indigenous people, and eventually the dominant labor pattern became to enslave people from sub-Saharan Africa. And this led to the black slave trade. One of the most horrific aspects of it was the Middle Passage, this journey practically right through the equator that they would pack human beings like cargo in chains, sometimes so they could not even sit up. These cargo holds were foul and wretched conditions, unimaginably wretched conditions. They brought human beings in these in the cargo section of these ships across the equator, across the ocean, taking many weeks and depending on wind, over a month. And so this becomes key to the New World experience for most Africans who are brought to the Americas forcibly and violently. It is something that is not, at the beginning, this unique modern race-based slavery as we understand it today. In Africa, they practice the traditional types of slavery and ransom as we saw in other areas. For example, in the Roman and Greek days, the Romans and Greeks took slaves in war, as the Africans did. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, the knights who were captured would be ransomed back at a high price in order to escape from having been captured in war. And so that was really what the African kingdoms did, was they took slaves in war and they ransomed them back to the people they came from in a treaty when the war ended. And that is a type of warfare and slavery that's very common to many different civilizations throughout human history. The sick twist of this came as European slavers are not roaming through Africa capturing people, they're negotiating and trading with African kingdoms themselves to purchase the people they've captured in war as slaves. Well, it doesn't take long to realize this is not the same as ransoming them back to their families, but it's a very tempting bargain because they can make a lot of money too. And so it makes many people and many kingdoms and merchants in Africa richer and gives them access to technology and weapons and the different trade goods that the Europeans brought. And they were at a home field disadvantage because if they refuse, the neighboring country might take the Europeans' deal. And so if you refuse to participate in the slave trade, you're faced with a catch-22, a devil's bargain. If the kings who tried to take the high road and refused to participate in the European slave trade were at greater risk of themselves and their people becoming victims of the slave trade and being enslaved by their neighbors who were getting richer and more powerful and buying guns and engaging in getting rich through the slave trade. And so it was an impossible situation to be put in. However, King Afonso I of the Congo was one who, after initially tolerating it, rejected the slave trade and prohibited the Congolese from engaging in this. But again, the problem was there were other countries nearby. And again, it was this diverse patchwork of different languages and cultures and people. And there's no unifying central government that could just, with one voice, reject what the Europeans were doing. And so it had a diverse impact on Africa. Many people who were captured in war were sold into slavery. The countries that survived, again, some objected on moral grounds and others either couldn't or didn't and participated in it. And it was an aspect of trade that continued between Africa, the Europe, and the Americas. That concludes our 2 case studies for today, Japan and Africa. Next time, we'll intend to conclude the entire unit by doing our case study on the Americas. Thanks for watching.